nowadays we are going to discuss the last section in probably statistics, and that is hypothesis testing, right? And as I said, this is bit important to understand because most of the algorithms that we use will have some or the other kind of hypothesis testing that would be involved. Okay, so that is why it is important to understand like what hypothesis testing is. We'll not get into too much detail of it because otherwise it will take a lot of time. But we'll see to it that we just understand what it is, right? And anyway, like manually, we are never going to do a hypothesis testing. So what we are interested in doing is that just understanding it, like how to do it, right? That's all. Okay, so let me start here. So generally, like hypothesis testing means hypothesis means some assumption, right? But why don't we call it an assumption? Because there are assumption can be anything in life. Like we can have assumptions, isn't it? And nobody will ask us proofs. We can always act as experts, or we can just have assumptions because we live in a society, right? I can have an assumption tomorrow would be a tough day for me, or it would be an easy day, whatever. So these are my assumptions. But in statistics, we make assumptions. They have to follow certain rules, and then the assumption should be testable, right? So not all assumptions can be tested through, let's say, statistical testing procedure, which you can call as a hypothesis testing also, right? So that is very, very important to understand. So generally, whatever we call as a hypothesis has to follow something known as a law of natural justice, right? So the hypothesis testing always has to follow this procedure of natural justice. As like I think I mentioned earlier also, that the law of natural justice is what the courts around the, let's say, this world are based upon, right? That's what all of the courts follow. So what there are like certain there is a simple, like let's say, a very important kind of a fundamental assumption or fundamental basis on which the law of natural justice actually works, is that a person is not guilty till proved so, right? So you cannot declare somebody guilty till the time he's proved so. So a person has to be proved guilty beyond doubt, right? Let me use this word. So you have to prove somebody guilty beyond doubt. That's the law of natural justice. So generally, like if you look at courts very quickly, what happens is even if a policeman has seen somebody committing a murder, that doesn't mean that the person can be like, let's say, immediately can be convicted and all those things, right? He becomes an important testimony, right, into the entire thing. That is okay, but he does not, but that doesn't mean that the court can straight away sentence somebody, right? A due diligence procedure has to be followed, because that is the first hypothesis that the judge starts with, not guilty, right? This is where the judge will start. Then the advocate who is like in the opposite side, he'll have to bring a lot of proofs and really prove that the person was the murderer, right? This is how it goes. In statistics, this also translates into something known as maintain status quo. This second part may be more useful, and this may be more operational part of it, right? So it means that and it refers to maintain status quo. That we'll see like how to do that, right? So before we go to hypothesis testing, how that happens, there is a small portion that we need to cover and understand. Generally, statistics is about estimations, right? We keep on estimating. Like from the next session onward, we'll actually move to machine learning algorithm. So if you look at machine learning algorithm or anything in statistics, it is about estimating parameters, right? Finding out parameters. That process is known as estimating it. Now, estimation can be two types. One, you can see it here, is the point estimation. That means I have a sample data. I calculate the mean the way I calculate it, and the mean turns out to be 3.2, right? So this is a point estimation. The second thing could be that instead of saying like, let's say, or let me put a condition before you, a small situation before you to probably so that you can appreciate it. Let's say you are taken to a school, right? And here there are like the school is still class 5th or 6th, you may say, okay, and then you are taken to a class 5, and these kids you have never met before, right? You have, for the first time you are interacting with them, and then suddenly what happens is that you are at the mercy of the school, of course, once you are inside. And then what happens is that somebody comes and he says that you cannot ask any questions from the students, but you are supposed to guess the right answer of what is the marks, what is the maximum and the minimum marks that these students would have received, right? And the condition is that if you get the range wrong, if you get the minimum and the maximum wrong, then there is a penalty of 10 lakhs. And assume for some time that the school or the class, wherever you have gone, you have no means, but if you get it wrong, they are in a position to get that money out from you, right? So then in this situation, I mean, think about it, what will you do? Simply, probably you will just ask one question: is there any negative kind of a marking that is there? Let's say the answer is there is no negative marking. So then what will you do? You will say, okay, the minimum and the maximum marks will lie between 0 and 100, right? Look at the range that you are given between 0 and 100, because you want to be absolutely safe. And if there is no negative marking, the marks are bound to lie between 0 and 100 only, right? So you're hedging your risk. Think of another situation where the person says, again, the same situation, that you can guess the marks between the minimum and the maximum, but by chance, if you get it wrong, it's only 1 rupee at stake. That's all, right? Nothing else. What will you do? I mean, you'll not definitely say 0 and 100. You'll start experimenting. In what way? That probably you look at the student and say probably that the minimum and the maximum marks will lie between 10 and 95, right? So you've decreased your range. So that means at times the answer as a point may not be what we are looking for, and that's what is not reality, isn't it? Somebody asks you in life, like, what is the chance that I'm investing in some equity, what is the kind of returns I can expect? Somebody may give you a answer like 14.6%. Now that may not be correct. A better and a safe answer would be what? That probably somebody says that your returns may lie between 13 to 15%, for an example, right? So this is how the world works. I mean, we don't generally work on point on a single point number. Rather, we work in a range. We say that, okay, the correct answer or the correct thing will lie between some range, right? That is what the actual thing is. Okay. So here also, when we are doing estimations, there are two options. One, there is a point estimate. So many things we make estimates, like parameters, lot of parameters we make estimates and all those things. So there may be a point estimate, example where the mean is 3.2, and there may be an interval estimation, which is like the example that I've given you. So instead of saying that the answer 3.2 is correct, like example you can take is that the answer, the parameter, the mean lies between, the correct mean lies between 2.2 to 4.2, right? Isn't it? So this 2.2 you can call it as the lower limit, and this one you can call it as the upper limit. And if you take a mean of this, if you take the middle point of this, then you will get this 3.2 only. Okay, so that means interval estimations are something that is more, let's say, useful kind of a thing. So but generally, I mean, if you calculate average using your formula, there is no interval estimate. The result doesn't come out as an interval estimate. The output of any mathematical calculation will always be a number, isn't it? A point. I'm calling it a point, right? A single number, I'm calling it as a point. So the output would be a point always, isn't it? But as I said, on the other hand, the reality lies between a range, isn't it? So what we need to do is we need to convert a point into an interval estimation. Now, if you look at the school example, if you are doubtful about something and there is a lot at stake. Your risk is high. If you want to eliminate your risk, then what is going to happen? Probably you will increase your range, right? You are going to increase your range. But if your risk is low, and if your stakes are low, then you may have a narrow interval, isn't it? Like I told you that you may say that the numbers lie between 30 and 90, right? So the range is only 60. In the earlier situation, the range was 100, right? So what we are discussing is there are two things that we are discussing, that we need to convert a point to an interval estimate. This is one. And how do we generally do it? Whatever is your point estimate, let me zoom this a bit. So whatever is your point estimate, PE, this is your point estimate, plus or minus z-score into SE. SE is known as the standard error, and SE is equal to standard deviation. You can read it here, standard deviation divided by square root of n. What is n? N is the number of observations that you have, right? So it is standard deviation divided by square root of n. So if this point estimate, if you take the minus sign, you will get the lower limit, right? And if you add this amount z into SE, then you are going to get the upper limit, right? Now, this z comes from the fact is like what amount of uncertainty do you want to leave, right? If you want to leave lesser uncertainty, then your range will become bigger, isn't it? You need to cover more range. If you are ready to tolerate a higher uncertainty, then what will happen is your range would be smaller. So generally in our cases, in whatever we do in machine learning or in the softwares that we are going to use, we always work on a confidence interval of 95%, right? So that means that 95% times whatever we are saying, and if something happens 100 times, example, if we are estimating some regression coefficients, for example. So for a similar kind of a data, for that data, if you estimate that those parameters 100 times, 95% times they'll be correct. 5% time, because of unforeseen kind of things, they may go wrong. This is what it means, right? So if you take a confidence interval of 95%, and then we have this formula, we always say this, that the sum of the confidence interval plus there is something known as the alpha, right? Confidence interval plus alpha should be equal to 1. Always remember this. So if I take if I say that I'm taking a confidence interval of 95%, right? So if I say that I'm taking a confidence interval of 95%, then what would be my alpha? My alpha would be straight away 5%, right? Because then only they are going to sum up to 1, right? So then only this thing is going to sum up to 1. Okay. So always remember that in business cases, alpha universally is taken to be 5%. In cases of clinical trials, wherever you have clinical trials data, which is more critical, then what is going to happen? Then alpha value is taken to be 2%, right? At times it is taken to be 2%. Okay. So then what will happen? Your confidence interval, then you say is 98%, isn't it? So it has to be 98%. In case of some social studies where human beings are involved, because human beings by nature are very, very heterogeneous. So in those cases, some people take confidence interval as 90% also, and typically in time series a confidence interval of 80% is also taken, because things are, if it is a very volatile kind of a time series, so in those cases when we go to time series we'll discuss that your confidence interval of 80 or 85% is also taken, right? But for majority of the data that you are going to handle, the confidence interval is all. Yeah.
Amit, can you explain that Z and alpha? What is that exactly? I'm not able to understand.
This Z actually, okay. So
Z.
do you remember we discussed about the normal distribution, right?
Yes, yes,
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what is the area under the normal curve? For ideal curve, what is the area under the curve? We discussed that.
0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Yes, right.
0.5, 0.5, right? The entire area
Right.
is 1.
Fine.
Entire area is 1.
Entire
Can I
area
say
is
that?
1.
Right.
Yes, yes.
So what I'm saying is that when I'm saying that this, I want a alpha of 5%, that means how
Right.
much uncertainty I'm able to tolerate? Total 5%. So
Okay.
2.5% in this tail. So this is 2.5% in this tail, right?
Okay. Okay.
2.5% will lie in this tail, and
Hmm.
2.5% is going to lie in this tail, right? 2.5% is going to lie in this tail, right?
Okay. Hmm.
Okay. Now, this, what is this area? This area, this side, if you look at it, would be what, 0.475, right? 0.475 this side and
Yes.
0.475 this side. Okay,
Yes. Yes.
0.475 this side. Am I right? This all sums up to 1, right?
You're right.
So what it means is that if I from here, and z value is what? The distance from here to here. If I calculate this z value, this is z is also the distance from the center to this point, right? So if I
Right.
calculate this z value, this value will come to 1.96. Okay. This
Okay.
value will come to what? 1 point. If you look at the table or if you use your Excel, this value will come to 1.96, right? So what I'm trying to say is the confidence interval. If I say confidence interval of 90%, then the Z value will come to how much? 1.96. Okay.
1.96.
And if you try to use a confidence interval of 98%, then I think the Z value comes to around 2.33, right? 2.33. If you take a confidence interval of how much? 98%, right? So now
Yes.
coming to this. So your formula for a 95% thing becomes your point estimate, okay? Plus and
Yes.
minus both things. Okay. Z would be 1.96, right?
Okay.
Because universally, until and unless stated, we are always going to use what? We are always going to use this as 5% only. Okay. So
Okay.
now, can you see this? For
Yes.
and let's say if you do it at 90%, 98% means that you are giving a 98% guarantee that my results, if I do something 100 times, my results would be repeated 98% of the time. That's the guarantee that you are giving. So in those cases,
Okay.
what is going to happen is that you can write your point estimate. P stands for point estimate, right? So we use a
Yeah.
formula, calculate a point estimate, and then this would be approximately 2.33 into SE, right? So that's what I'm saying. So if you ask for a more guarantee, then the how does it hedge? It will make its range bigger. Can you see this? This range has become bigger. This is a smaller range. This range is smaller, and this is a bigger range, a larger range. This is a larger range, right? So if you ask for more guarantee, then what will happen? We'll try to cover more range. Example, like I told you, if you put a penalty of 10 lakhs, then I'll say that my marks lie between 0 and 100. And if you say it's only 1 rupee penalty, probably I'll make a guess 40 to 90 or something like this, because I lose not much amount, right? So that's how it works. Okay. So
Okay.
the point that you should remember, even if you forget all this stuff, is that there is a confidence interval and there is a alpha kind of thing. So the testing happens at a level, and this is without, if I don't state it, it's always 5%. Don't worry about it, right?
Okay.
Majority
Okay.
of times alpha is going to be 0.5. Just keep this in mind. Okay. Right.
Okay.
Fine. So now, so this we'll remember. Now, coming back to like what I said to the hypothesis testing thing, right? So let's go to the hypothesis testing and understand that. Why is it not? Okay. So now, so I said what is hypothesis testing? So hypothesis, statistical hypothesis testing is a structured thing. It's always the same structure. It doesn't change. It has two parts, right? There is a null hypothesis, right? As I said, how do you frame the null hypothesis? Always keep in mind that the null hypothesis is framed by keeping in mind the principle of maintaining the status quo. Let me give an example. What does it mean? Let's say there is a manufacturing factory, right? Whatever, like it manufacture tires or anything. Now there are two shifts which are running there, like A, B. Okay, it runs in two shifts, A and B. Now the manager in charge, the production in charge, what he thinks is that the employees who come in shift A generally work better, right? Why? Because they feel that the senior management is around, right? In the daytime, the senior management is around, and the B shift is in the night, right? So he thinks that when the senior managers are around, probably these people, the employees, actually work. They are dedicated to the work and the productivity is high. And the evening, what happens is that these people have a nice time and they are not focused on the work, and hence the productivity takes a hit, right? He has a doubt. So he needs to test this. I mean, one is that subjectively, I have now concluded and I think that this is correct. And then what I go around doing is I declare that the B shift guys are lazy, right? This is one way of doing it. But in statistics, we cannot do it like this, right? We need to follow the rules of natural justice. Not guilty till proved so. Okay, that we have to keep in mind very, very strongly. So what I'll do is I'll write something as a null hypothesis. I'll set it up as a hypothesis. So I'll write H naught. A null hypothesis is always shown by H naught, right? H, and this is a subscript 0. So H naught. So my hypothesis, null hypothesis would be, and let's say the productivity, this may be wrong. Productivity cannot be measured by the production quantity alone. Understand it. There may be other parameters also, like example, quality, rejections, so many things, and the kind of problems that one had to face in different environments, right? Working in the night is a challenging thing. It's not as easy as working in the day. So but let me simplify things. Let's say that the productivity is signified by the amount of the production that they are doing. So I'm saying that the average of, and I observe it for a month, I say that mu A is equal to mu B, right? Though I have a doubt, I'm that manager, but I cannot start accusing. Otherwise, that will become accusation, isn't it? That you guys, now this is not equal to, generally we put a colon here, right? So this is how we write it. So generally we'll put a colon here. So H naught is mu A is equal to mu B, right? That is what your H naught is, alternate hypothesis. If this does not prove correct, then there should be something to fall back on. So there is a fallback option. We call it the alternate hypothesis. Now, alternate hypothesis, either you can write it like H1, you can write it like HA, whatever way you want to write it. There are multiple ways of writing it, right? And it doesn't matter. So then you may say there are multiple options here. Now you may say that mu A is not equal to mu B. This is what you can say, right? You can say mu A is not equal to mu B. This is what you can say, right? Or it cannot be and. You can put your alternate hypothesis as, you can say that my alternate hypothesis is that mu A, because anyway I believe that this is the day shift, so mu A is greater than mu B. I can put it like this also. Okay, so the point that I'm making is that you cannot have a greater than, equal to, or less than sign in the alternate hypothesis. Here you cannot have this, right? It has to be a equal to only. Now here you have options. Either you can, in the alternate, you can either say not equal to, right? Sorry, this not equal to, you can call it less than, or you can call it greater than. But a strict less than and a strict greater than. You know why? Because equal to is already used here. So these three options are available, right? Depending on what option you are using, if you use a not equal to, this is known as a two-tailed test, right? What is this known as? This is known as a two-tailed test, right? Two-tailed. Why this known as a two-tailed test? We'll spend some time on that, right? So this is known as a two-tailed test, okay? And when you are doing this, then these are known as one-tailed test, right? This is known as, these both are known as one-tailed test, right? One-tailed test. So we'll understand what is the tail business here, right? What is the tail? So a tail is, a distribution has a tail, you know it, right? So this is a tail. So two tail, and you have a one tail test, right? So Yeah, this is written here. You have to maintain status quo. Always remember that, right? When you're framing. So if you are that manager, you cannot start with saying your H naught cannot be this, because this H naught is you have to maintain status quo. Status quo or probably translates into not guilty till proved so. So if you can't prove that actually the B shift guys are having a good time, then what you need to do is you need to believe, you need to start with this belief like the judge, that both of them are are equally productive. You have to start from there, and then you have to collect data and then prove that no, that's not the case. Okay, so your H naught is mu A is equal to mu B, right? So this is how your hypothesis is framed. Now in this, I'll spend some time on telling you that, so this is how do we frame a hypothesis. Now, when you look at statistical hypothesis testing, right? So what happens is, we have understood that it has a null hypothesis. It's very, very important, right? Always remember, if hypothesis testing is happening, then it should have a null hypothesis. This is very, very important. Point number one. Point number two, I told you that the hypothesis testing has to happen at a alpha level. That I said, until and unless specified, always assume it to be 5%. As I said, until and unless specified. In some cases, it may be specified that do a testing at 10% level. If it is not specified, we always assume it to be 5%. So our alpha is 5% always, right? So the structure is very clear. What are the things that are a given? We cannot change it. We have a H naught, right? This H naught, I told you, should have a equal to sign always. Then you can have alternate where you have choices, right? Very quickly, what are the choices that we have? It can be not equal to, this is one choice. You may say not equal to, you may say less than, you may say equal to, whatever you want to do. That's all absolutely allowed. That's not a problem, right? And I told you this is two-tailed test. Very quickly, this is two-tailed test, and these are known as one-tailed test, right? This is one. The other thing is, there is one more flavor to this. It may be a one sample test. Probably I'll write it like this. It could be a one sample test, right? So this may be one sample test, or this may be a two sample test, right? Or this may be a two sample test. This may be a two sample test. What does one sample or two sample mean? Just understand the use cases, right? Listen to this use case. You say that, example, all these factories, like example, think of a Coke, right? Coke has bottling plants all over the world, right? And different size of bottles. So I'm talking of that normal bottle, glass bottle that has contents as 300 ml, let's say, right? So do you think that all the bottles will contain exactly 300 ml? That's not possible, right? You understand, because machines will have their own variations, isn't it? So they always keep on doing some kind of a testing. I mean, they pull out one bottle from after I specified this thing, right? So they'll pull out one bottle, and somebody who is from the quality assurance department, QA department, will check the contents, right? And of course, these contents are not exactly 300.00, right? There may be a variation. If it is a very good quality plant, then the standard deviation or variations, you may call them, are very, very limited. But if it is not a quality plant, the variations would be higher, right? Isn't it? So that's the difference between good machinery and a bad machinery. So in this case, he'll be setting it up like a hypothesis, right? So his hypothesis would be H naught. He'll put it this way: H naught, that every bottle that the average of the bottle, not every bottle, the average of the bottle that we are filling in a day, probably he'll test, let's say, assume he's testing around 100 bottles. So the average of, or 50 bottles, if 100 sounds too big a number, or 20, 25 bottles, whatever it is, should be 300 ml, right? In this case, what are you doing? You have made, or the quality assurance guy here, he has a batch of bottles, isn't it? He has a batch of bottles. You can call it the sample. This is the sample that he has at hand. Those bottles that he is picking up from the end of the line, they are known as the samples. So this is the sample. The Coke bottles are the samples. And what is he comparing it against? He's comparing it against a standard, isn't this is the company standard. So this is a given standard that he's comparing it. Now there can be so many other examples. Example, a company filling in a floor. Let's say there is a flour kind of a company, and that is filling flours into bags, and then you say that every bag should have 5 kg. So somebody is pulling out those flour bags and checking whether the contents are 5 kg or not, right? So you already have a standard, and you are checking against a standard. You have a sample of flour bags, and then you are checking it against that standard. This kind of a situation is known as one sample, right? Isn't it? You're just taking one sample and you're checking it against some hard standard. This is your hard standard, right? Isn't it? 300 ml, that's it. So this is known as a one sample test. What is the two sample test? In a two sample test, you actually compare two samples. And what is the conclusion that you try to arrive at? Whether, this is very important. Okay, how will you, in a two sample test, this is how you'll write the alternate hypothesis. So H naught is equal to mu A equal to mu B, right? Mu A equal to mu B. If you ask me in machine learning, what kind of a hypothesis testing happens more, this one is very prevalent, right? One sample is very prevalent. Two sample is also there. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but both of them happen. So mu A equal to mu B. Now here I had already given you an example. Let's say a manager wants to compare two shifts in productivity. You want to compare two group of consumers for their choices about a service or a product, those kind of things, where you have two samples. So one sample coming from one geographic location, maybe the other sample coming from the other geographic location, or it could be one sample coming from a age cohort. When you say a cohort, age cohort means that we can divide ages into, let's say, 10 years or kinds of a gap. So we say people who are less than 40 years, that's one cohort, and people who are above 40 years, that is one age cohort. Let's say we have very broad age cohorts. So this mu A is the sample, and you are trying to understand their probably their liking for some social media thing or whatever it could be. So this is your younger age cohort, and this is your older age cohort. So you are comparing two cohorts, and then you try to see whether they have the same kind of preferences or they have different kind of preferences, right? So here in this case also, your H1 would be what? It can be again three kinds. It could be H1, you say, is mu A. So you say that it is not 300, then whatever it is. I mean, I'm not interested in greater than or equal to, but it's not following my standards, right? If you are filling more, then the company is at a loss. And if you are filling less, then if somebody finds out, then there would be a cheating allegation. The brand image would be tarnished, right? So, but what I'm trying to test here is it is not 300. Now that is 310 or 308. I'm not really worried. Or it could be like, is it that I'm more afraid that we are not filling less? I mean, somebody checks it out in the market, and suddenly then there is a claim in the paper that the Pepsi guys are cheating or the Coke guys are cheating. We have 50, and this is a big business in US. You know, many people are doing all these things. They actually keep on doing all these things, and they find out all the suing is a big business in US if you look at it. And there are funny things on which people keep on suing here and there. There are some people who keep on measuring all this only, and if they find any variation, they go and sue, and they say this company cheating this and that, and you know. So these kind of things are known as torts there, right? So in India, probably this may not be a very good this thing, but US this happens. Okay, so H1, if you look at H1, then what happens is here again there are three options. Here a greater than option is also available, right? So here also you have three options, right? So it's like a matrix. One, hypothesis testing, it can be one sample, two sample. That's the first choice. So let me draw it very quickly. So I'll say, when you say hypothesis testing, then the first choice is, what are we doing? So the first decision point is, what are we doing? Are we doing a one sample or a two sample? This is the first decision point, right? So you say, let's say you say two sample. Okay, if you are doing two sample, then what is my alternate? Then then I have three choices in the alternate, right? Because the null hypothesis is fixed, H naught is fixed, but the alternate hypothesis can be what? It can be not equal to, right? It can be not equal to, it can be less than, or it can be what? Greater than. So if it is less than, I'll straight away use what? I'll use a two-tail test, right? Sorry, it's a two-tail test. This will become the two-tail test, and this is a one-tail test, right? So this is a one-tail test. Okay, so this is clear, right? I'm not getting into theory and all of this because this theory is a bit boring and it becomes very, very long, right? So what I'll try to do is make you understand on a conceptual level, and we'll then go to R and look at the codes. I mean, it's very, very easy to run all this in R, very easy, believe me, right? So, and there is a lot of material also that I have. So this is two-tail test and this is the one-tail test, right? Now, when you say tail, it always refers to a distribution, right? So there is a role of a distribution here. So I'll spend some time in explaining what is the role of a distribution. Why do we require a distribution, right? So this one you have noted, right? This one, at least you are understanding something out here, right? Okay. Now, when I say tail, that means I'm referring to a distribution. So the theory says this, that if you have two samples, right? Let's say these are two samples. These are, let's say I make it like this. So this is a sample space, right? Which is A and which has a, which has a mean of mu A, let's say. Right. And this is another sample space that I have drawn. And this will not look like a cloud. This is just for a very, just for representation purpose, right? You know this is mu A, this is mu B, right? And if I keep on, this is, let's say this is A sample. Let me not write mu A, mu B. Let me put it B like this. So if I keep on drawing, imagine I draw from this. Let's say this is people who are living in Bangalore city, right? Let's say, and these are people who are living in Mumbai. Let's assume this, right? Huge population. And we say that we'll only select males who are between age of 18 to 60, right? Then also a big population in Bangalore, and it's a big population that we have in Mumbai, right? Population is never accessible to us. We never can access a population, so we never use the word population. We always say sample. So these are big sample. The Bangalore city is a sample, and this is a big, Mumbai city is a sample. Somebody is doing, let's say, a survey on understanding the choice understanding the choice of or understanding the choice of, let's say, noodles, right? So which is their preferred noodle, trying to scale on a Maggie. They're trying to understand the choice of Maggie, right? So from here, let's say I draw 100 people. From here also I draw 100 people, right? Look at this, right? Listen to this carefully. I draw 100 people from here. I draw 100 people from here. I take the average of this. There would be average, isn't it? If I've taken, so the choice are on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say. So this would be mu A, and this would be mu B. I'm designating them as my sample. And let's say I draw these 100 samples 100 times. So 100 samples, and I do this 100 times. And all the 100 times, I'll calculate the means. So this side, how many means I'll have? I'll have 100 means. They may not be exactly equal. There may be slight variations, but there would be variations, isn't it? So I have 100 means here, and I'll have 100 means this side, right? Now, what I do is, if I take these means and take their difference, I take for all these 100, I calculate this quantity. Let's say I put those 100 means in a Excel sheet, and in the column A, I put the mu A 100 means, and in the B, I put the 100 means that I have from B, and in the C, I put the difference, mu A minus mu B, that's all, right? And this C column, this column where I have stored this, I take it and actually plot it, right? If I plot it, then there is a distribution which will result. This distribution will look like your normal distribution only. If you look at it, right? It's a bell-shaped curve again. This distribution is known as T distribution. This is known as T distribution. This is one. It has a small history. In 1820, there was a person by the name of Gosset, right? So this person name was Gosset, right? So he used to work in Scotland in a brewery. Brewery, all of you know. I mean, Scotland is famous for its scotches, right? So his job was he used to work as a wine taster, right? So his job was tasting wine samples also, or whiskey samples. I mean, Scotland is known for whiskeys. So he was testing whiskeys all through the day, right? Different kind of combination of products. And of course, because he was working in the quality assurance department, so his job was to tell whether it's okay or not okay. Now, he used to record all those things, and that is how he got a lot of data, right? So from that data, he found out that normal distribution will not work for situations where you have smaller samples, right? So I'm introducing one more dimension, the notation of a sample size, right? So anything which is statistically, now all these things probably may not be always true, but statistically, if you have a sample size of 29 or less, is known as a small sample. And if you have 30 numbers or more, it is known as a large sample. So he found that the normal distribution does not work for small samples. Because in a day, how many samples will he be testing? He'll be testing 5, 10. Otherwise, I mean, he'll lose his consciousness, isn't it? And the whiskey that he would be tasting would be neat, isn't it? So, I mean, there is a limit to which a person can taste probably. So not more than 5, 10 samples he would be testing. Otherwise, 10 samples will mean a high dose, and that too of different kind of a whiskey. So I think this would be too high a dose for him to handle, isn't it? So he was working on a small sample, this is for sure, and he was recording all that. So he found that the normal distribution was not working. He wanted to publish all that, but from that day, 1820 to till today, no company allows its data to be published in the public domain, and that's the biggest problem. So when people want to learn data science, I mean, there is nobody ready to share the data. Very few companies who are ready to share it, right? Otherwise, data is a big issue. So the company strictly forbid anybody sharing the data, right? So what he did is he assumed a pseudonym by the name of student, and then he published it in one of the journals. I don't know, it was the journal that was published from the Royal Academy of Science from London or some other journal that I don't remember, but in a prestigious journal he could publish it, because this is a highly valuable kind of a thing. So it published in a very prestigious kind of a journal. So this is also known as a student distribution also. Some people call it the student distribution also, right? Or then some people call it T distribution, right? So whatever you may prefer. So for short, we'll call it T distribution. And the T might have come either from the Gosset's T, which is in the end, or because the student also has a T in the end, whatever you may call it. The property of this is like a normal distribution only, but it had fat tails. That means what will happen is a normal curve will look more flatter and longer. That means its tail would be bit thinner, whereas this T distribution will have fat tails, right? It has more area in the tails, right, as compared to a normal thing, right? So it has fat tails, you call it, right? Now every distribution we discussed should have a parameter that we have discussed in detail. So if we are discussing a distribution, automatically I'd given you a template. You are supposed to, someone of you was supposed to discuss some distribution here. I think log normal or something. I don't know if anybody is ready to discuss that. So if you want, in the end, you can take 10 minutes and discuss the distribution. That would be good if you have done something on that. So if you look at this T distribution, then it will have two parameters. Now here, the two parameters that T has are not mu and sigma, right? They are not mu and sigma, right? So for this normal, you know, they are what? They are mu and sigma, right? But for a T distribution, it is a two parameter distribution. It has mu, of course, as one of the parameters, and the other parameter is known as the degree of freedom, right? I've told you this concept, right? That's why I spent some time on this degree of freedom idea. So this is known as, so this parameter, the T distribution will have two parameters, mu and df. So that means whenever we do two sample test, all your machines, all your software generally do a T test. And also remember what happens, I mean, if the sample size is 30 or more, and if I do a t-test, then the t-test in the normal distribution, which is also known as the z-test, right? You can call it a z-test, right? So anything from here is known as a z-test, okay? This is known as a z-test. And this is known as what? This is known as a t-test, right? So this is known as a t-test. So when you test against this distribution, it is known as testing against a t distribution, or you, in short, you may call it a t-test, right? Sorry. So this is a z-test and this is a t-test. So what happens if the sample size becomes larger? Then a t-test and a z-test will give you similar results. There will not be a difference, right? So if your degrees of freedom become 30 or more, then your z and after like 100, they'll give you exactly the same result. 100, 120 is the limit. So your t-test tables are only till 120 degree of freedom. After that, you can assume it to be a normal distribution, right? But understand, what I'm trying to tell you is all your machines, whether all your softwares, whether you work on SPSS, SAS, R, Python, anything, they all conduct a t-test, right? That is important. They all conduct something known as a t-test. That's what they do, okay? So this we'll keep in mind. Now the other thing is, let's go to how is this hypothesis testing done. Okay, so I'll try it. If you find it very difficult, and if you are not able to get it, or if you are not able to understand it, don't worry about it, right? How this happens is this way. So I'm discussing the two-tailed test first, right? So I'm discussing the two-tailed, and then we'll discuss the one-tailed test. So as soon as you say that you are comparing two samples, two sample means to be precise, right? So if you are comparing two sample means, then we know from theory that if we have two samples, the difference of their mean actually follows a t distribution, right? That we know. So that means we have to do our testing against a t distribution, because that is what will result if you actually plot lot of sample distribution differences. So if you take two samples and then keep on, and these two samples will come from should come from the same population. So the population, though I'm taking people from Bombay and Mumbai, but both of them are, let's say they eat Maggie, like example. So that way the population is similar, right? Though geographically they are distributed, but the sense of population is that both of them eat Maggie, right? That's very important. Okay. So if there is, from the same population, if we draw two samples and keep on plotting their differences, then they should follow a t distribution. That's the theory, and that's why we do a testing against the t distribution. So what does a two-tailed test tell us, right? So that is what we have to understand. Let's say I do a testing at alpha. That's very important. So my alpha is how much? As I said, if I don't specify anything, by default, it's going to be 5%, right? So I'm doing against a 5%. So what I do is that I'll have these two means, mu A, right? Mu A equal to mu B. This is what I'm testing, right? Can I also write it as mu A minus mu B equal to 0? I can write it like this also, isn't it? Mu A minus mu B is equal to 0. I can write this also. Okay, this is one. And we discussed how to calculate a z-score, right? Remember last time we had discussed z equal to x minus mu divided by standard deviation, right? Both the parameters are used, x minus mu divided by sigma, right? You can call it x minus mu. Somebody will write it x minus x bar also, right? One and the same thing, right? Some people write it x minus x bar. Okay, so whatever way it is written, it means the same thing. So x minus mu by sigma, this is the z-score, right? Similarly, we can have a t-score, right? So t-score is exactly calculated like this only. X minus mu divided by whatever the sigma is, right? This sigma comes here. Okay, so the t value is calculated. Not getting in, let's see if I can show you some example. Probably I'll show you a worked example. Okay, so what happens is we divide this area. I told you in a two-tailed test, this area will contain how much? 2.5%. This is the 2.5%, right? I'm leaving it to God, right? That's my error chance. Things which are like away. See, this is very, very far from the center, isn't it? Things are very, very far from the center. They are uncertain kinds. I don't have much control on that, right? And here I'm again chopping off how much area? 2.5% here. Okay, 2.5% this side, 2.5% this side. Then what do I do? With the data, I calculate the t value, right? The t value here. The t value for 95% is not 1.96. There is a little variation there. But what I'll do is I'll calculate the t value for the difference of the mean. And let's say if the point comes here, the t value that I've calculated from here, if that lies here, right? If that lies here, then I'll say that, okay, I'm not going to reject my null hypothesis, right? And I'll believe in my null hypothesis that mu A is equal to mu B. So what am I doing here is I'm dividing my distribution, this curve, into three areas. This I will call as the rejection region. Always remember this. This is what? This is a rejection region. I never have an acceptance region. Please always remember. I mean, you cannot say that this is so I call this do not reject region, right? This is my do not reject. So you may say, is there a difference between do not reject and accept? Always understand, like in court, when somebody is not found guilty, they very clearly, the judges put a disclaimer. They say not guilty because lack of evidence. This is what they say. So the judge says he may be guilty, right? I'm not saying that he's not guilty, but what I'm saying is lack of evidence, I find him not guilty. So that's why we reject and do not reject, right? We never accept anything. Though I also use this word, but remember that's technically not the correct word. So we reject and do not reject. That's what we do. We don't accept anything. And this is also a rejection region, right? So what are we doing? This is the standard thing, 2.5%, 2.5% this year. We calculate the t value here. So if it lies here, we do not reject. But what we don't reject? We don't reject the null hypothesis. And if I calculate the t value, and by chance if it lies here, then this is in the rejection region. So what am I going to reject? I'm going to reject the null hypothesis, right? So I'm going to reject the null hypothesis. And what am I not going to reject? The alternate hypothesis. If I reject the null hypothesis, I'm not rejecting the alternate hypothesis, right? That this is how it is. The modern system, so there are calculations. Probably what I'll do is I'll show you some calculations so that if it makes sense, it is okay. But if it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. I mean, anyway, as I said, you are not going to do any manual calculation there. This is more for understanding. So let me open this slide. And if there is an example there, let me show you that example. That's all right. So all this stuff I've told you, population 1, population 2, all these things are there. So and this is the rejection region size, that right? Can you see this 2.5% or 0.025, and this is how it happens. So we rejection and this we do. Okay, now let's look at this example, right? So what is happening here? This difference between means, right? So they are advertising managers, right? There are some advertising managers, and these are some auditing managers. Let's say this is about their salaries. So we are testing the hypothesis that there is a difference of salaries between advertising managers and auditing managers. And you know that generally it's always discussed that there can be a difference in salaries and all that stuff. We keep on talking about it, right? So we say that hypothesis testing for difference between means or wage, like the wage example, right? So if you look at it, then what is happening here? This is the rejection region. This is also the rejection region. This is what? So we calculate this here he is doing based on Z, but the similar calculation you can do for T also, right? So you can calculate this value. Okay. I think a T example will also be there. Generally, as I said, that you work on T, that is very important, right? So this is T when I said. Okay, so you calculate T, you can see the formula x1 minus x2 bar minus mu1 minus mu2 bar. And the calculation of this sigma is a bit complicated thing, right? You can see there's a very complicated calling. This is known as pooled variance, right? The word that is used is pooled variance. Right now, I'm not taking you into that, otherwise we'll digress, nothing will happen. Let's come here. So this is what we have here also. And if you look at this example, training method A, you are trying to understand the difference between two training methods. We'll calculate the t value. So the t value comes minus 5.20. And based on this, we'll find out whether to reject H0 or not reject H0. We'll put it here in this. So wherever depending, so this is t equal to minus 2.060. And if you look at this t equal to minus 0.520. So if I look at this, then where is minus 0.520 going to lie? It's going to lie outside here, right? Isn't it? So it's going to lie in the rejection region. This will lie actually on the left hand side. So it is going to lie here in the rejection region. So what am I rejecting? The important thing is, what am I rejecting? I'm rejecting the H0, which says that mu1 minus mu equal to 0. So I'm saying no, both the training examples are not equally efficient, right? There is a difference between training method A and training method B, right? So this is how it works. Okay, now let me just discuss one more last idea, and then we go to the R codes and we'll run the R codes there, right? This modern testing, we don't do all this manual stuff, doesn't happen, but there is a sense of something known as a p value, right? So there is a p value thing. So what is a p value? That I'll discuss. Probably let me go to this slide, and then we'll discuss the idea of p value, right? So let me do it this way, and then let me discuss the idea of p value. See here, I know that this is how much, this alpha value is how much, 2.5%. I know it. Here the alpha value is how much? So this is 2.5% area which is lying. And how much is this area? This is 2.5% area which is lying here. Let's say I have a point here. I get a point here, right? So this area would be how much? This would be less than 2.5%, right? In one half, and if I double it up, then it would be less than 5%. So there is a concept of something known as P. All your softwares will report your P, and based on that, you have to take a decision. So just note this. If your P value is less than your alpha value, alpha I told you by default is how much? It is always 5%. You can write it 0.05. This is what your alpha is, right? Always. So if your value P value is less than alpha, then what is the action to be taken? Reject H0. Right, just note this the final thing that I'm telling you, this you can work out everything through this, right? So just reject H0, right? Just reject H0. That's what you do. Okay, and if the p value is greater than alpha, p value is greater than alpha, that is what? It is greater than 0.05. I'm assuming this is my default always, 99% cases. So then what do? Do not reject. We don't accept anything. So I'll say do not reject H0, right? Do not reject what? H0. Write it on a piece of paper, because again and again we'll have to look at these rules and take a decision. Now what happens when p equal to alpha? If it is p equal to alpha, then what is that? The line belongs to the umpire. You are the umpire in this case. So according to your convenience, you can either declare this reject H0, or you can say do not reject H0. But there would be very rare cases where alpha would be actually, p would be exactly be equal to 0.05. That is not going to happen. That's going to be a very rare chance. Okay, so but remember that if this happens by chance, if this p equal to alpha happens, then remember that the line belongs to the umpire. So you can take a call. You can reject it or you can accept it. Sorry, you may not reject it. Whatever you want to do, that's absolutely your call, right? So this is about what hypothesis testing. That's right. So there is something known as type 1 and type 2 errors. Okay, so what Ajay is telling, that is something which is known as type 1 and type 2 errors. So, and they are dependent on my like this. So this is what is there probably, yeah, this one. So okay, good, like thanks for reminding. So very quickly we'll discuss the type 1 and type 2 errors also. So what is the type 1 error? The type 1 error is if I reject a hypothesis when that is true, right? So let me look at this. See, if the null is actually true, right, and the null could be false, but I do a hypothesis testing and I fail to reject the null, and or I reject the null. There are two actions. So these are the actual thing here. Here you have the actual thing here. This is the actual, and this is the outcome of my hypothesis testing, right? This is the outcome of my hypothesis testing. So if I fail to reject null, right, and the null was actually correct, that's a correct decision, isn't it? And this is also a correct decision. The null was actually false. It was not correct, and I reject the null. That's what I want. That's what the outcome of my hypothesis testing should be. So these, whatever is lying on this diagonal is the correct decisions, right? But if the null was false and my test, hypothesis test, actually failed to reject the null, then I'm committing a type 2 error, right? What can be example? Like, we'll take an example. Wait a minute. Then if the null was true, it was actually correct, right? But then the null, what did we do? We actually rejected it. Now the chances of committing a type 1 error is equal to alpha, right? So if you keep your alpha like too high or too low, then your type 1 errors are actually impacted by that, right? And like p, as like Ajay was saying, if the p value is very small, which is 0.03 or 3%, that means the chances of my rejecting a correct true null is very less, right? That's why this is like very important, right? So if you are working on alpha which are very small, then there can be a problem. Then there are chances that you might reject a null hypothesis, though that is correct, right? So that's the risks. And if you try to put alpha a very large number, then anything can pass through. So that's why it's a tricky decision. That's why we take something as 5%, right? So it is like a kind of a trade-off. This is one more reason that why we like say that 5% is good, right? And this beta is also known as the power of the test. I'm not getting into it. There are certain areas that I'm leaving right now, that because all of you may not require it. That is the reason. That is highly statistical topics. So if you need them, do like turn over or read a book, which is, so the point is sampling that. So how to decide on a sample size, that we'll discuss somewhere, I'll mention it. So how to decide on a sample size, this is one. Then there is something known as the central limit theorem. Central limit theorem I'm not discussing here. Then power of a test. How do you decide the power of a test? This beta is a mixture of so many things. It contains alpha, the sample size, and so many things, right? So power of a test. Beta is also known as the power of a test. So regarding sampling, sampling distribution, central limit theorem, sample size, power of a test, all these things I'm leaving, because generally these kind of things are used by people who are into market research and all those things, right? So those people will do it, but people who are into business analytics or machine learning generally don't use all this kind of stuff, right? So but they are very interesting, and at times they can add value. As I said, at times they can add value, not always. So if you have interest, there would be a chapter of sampling on in the book, and you can go through it, right? And if you have questions, you can discuss. But I'm simply leaving that part, right? So there are two kinds of error. Just remember, type 1 and type 2 errors, right? And this thing we'll again discuss when we get into classifications. So just remember this. This is the important thing. Okay, so that's all. But ultimately, like what I'm saying, what at least you remember right now is that p value is less than alpha, then we are rejecting the null hypothesis, and we should know what the null hypothesis is, isn't it? What we are rejecting, what we are not rejecting, we should know that. And if p is greater than alpha, then we are not rejecting the null hypothesis. If p equal to alpha is your call, whatever you want to do, right? So let me do one thing. Let me like here, like I have this R. Okay, so I have some good material on this. Probably I'll pass it on to you. That would be good. This is, if you want to download, you can download. This is Martin's course, right? So this is, there is a professor by the name of Martin. I've forgotten which university exactly, but he has a very nice course on, he runs statistics through R. That's a course on statistics only, not machine learning. So the first chapter may not be very useful to you because it is about how to install R and all that stuff, right? Which may not be very useful. But the second one is important to us. So what we are doing is 1 and 2 sample t-test. This is what we are going to do. Okay. So It's a very, very simple thing. We'll go through this PDF only. Why this PDF? Because if you carry this PDF with you, you can anytime, anywhere that you want. This is like a classical, right? So anywhere, if you think of doing anywhere, you'll not require this PDF. Even if you do 3 t-tests on your own, then the one sample and t-test can be done, right? So just let me open RStudio instance, right? I'll just open RStudio and we'll work on this. Okay, so the command is very, very simple. I mean, so we'll just discuss the, let it open and then we'll discuss it. Okay, so I'll use one of it, something like untitled. This one I'll take. Okay, and the first thing is I'm introducing you to the syntax. That's very, very simple. So I'll take this and put it here. Okay, now let's look at the syntax, right? Okay, so if you look at the syntax, the basic command is just t.test, that's all, right? Now, t-test can be conducted for 1 sample or 2 samples. So X is the place. I hope this is visible. I need not increase the font, right? So if you want me to increase the font, I can do that also. Just let me know if you are not able to see it, right? So X is one sample and Y is your second sample. So if you are doing a 1 sample test, then don't put anything here, right? R is intelligent. You can just remove it and it will understand you are doing a 1 sample test. Now this is the alternate. Remember that I said, are you doing a 2-sided test that is not equal to, or you are doing a less, or you are doing a greater than? I told you 3 options with the alternate. So this is the alternate hypothesis, right? This is your mu, the average against which you want to test it, right? Then we also have something known as a paired t-test. What is a paired t-test? Think of a situation, right? The flavor of tea that I discussed with you is about 2 samples. So you have 2 samples and you are comparing them for means. Now imagine another situation where there is some training to be imparted to a group of people. And generally when a training is imparted, we'll also like to know how effective the training has been, isn't it? So generally, many places what is done is before the training starts, a test is taken. You may call it the pre-training test. Set of questions are given and then the scores are evaluated, right? Then the training is imparted and after that, post the training, there is again the same candidates, right? The same candidates are provided a test again. And then what do? We compare the means. So it is the same group of people. In a 2 sample test, there are 2 different samples. In this case, it's the same group, it's the same sample, but the treatment is different. There is a pre-treatment and there is a post-treatment. Now this can apply to training. This can apply to, so what do you want? Ultimately, if it is a good training, you will generally see that the averages should be more, isn't it? So if the training is good, the alternate should be rejected, isn't it? If the alternate is accepted, that means the training had no impact, isn't it? I mean, they were equally, like say, ignorant about a thing, and even after the training is delivered, they are ignorant about it, right? So the ignorancy is not gone anywhere if your null hypothesis is not rejected. It can be used in a second situation also, where there is a doctor, right? There is a group of patients who are there's some, let's say, medical situations which are examined, example heart rate, cholesterol, this that, and then a medication is delivered to them, the same that group only. And then after some time, of course these medications will take some time, but after that you monitor their situation. So you again look at heartbeats, you look at cholesterol, all those things. So in this case, what will you, because these are negative things, the heart rate has to go down, the cholesterol has to go down. So again, what will you like? The H0 should be probably rejected if you want to prove that the medication was successful. So these kind of things are known as paired t-test, or some people call it pre-post also, right? Pre-post. So both names are there. There are other names also. There are 3-4 names popular for this kind of a thing, but right now we are just discussing 2 names for it. So one is paired. So if it is a paired kind of a thing, so tell the system that this is a paired. So just say paired equal to true. That's all. Then this is variance equal to equal. So if there are two samples, they may not have equal variances, isn't it? We know it, right? The variances may not be equal. So if you are not sure that the variances are equal, then don't put anything here. Don't try to say variance dot equal to true without testing. You can actually do a statistical test for testing whether variances are equal or not. That test is known as the F test, and the F test actually is named after Fisher. That's also known as the Fisher test. Fisher is known as the father of statistics, right? So 1920 he gave this test, which is known as the Fisher test, or short it is known as the F test. And the F test, we'll discuss again when we do regression, is used to understand whether the variances of two samples are equal or not, right? So T test is done for finding out if the two means are equal or not. And if you want to understand whether the two variances, the two sample have equal variances or not, then what are we going to do? We are going to do a F test, remember that. And the last one is confidence dot level equal to 95%. I told you without saying it will always be 95, but in some special case, suppose you have to change it, right? There is a situation that you should do it at 10%, you can go here and change it, right? So this is what it is, t-test, and this is here. Let's do one or two examples so that things are clear to you. Okay, so there are some good examples I think which are given here, and let's look at it, right? So let's look at this one sample t-test, how to do it. So an outbreak of salmonella related illness. So salmonella is a content, right, that is found in water which is contaminated. So there is an ice cream factory which will be using water. So if it is contaminated, then this salmonella disease actually then spreads, right? So then what do people do? Generally is they try to find out waterborne diseases would be because of either some water supply that is contaminated or this ice cream thing would be a problem. So they collected 9 samples. Can you look at this? 9 randomly sampled batches of ice cream. And the levels of MPN, I don't know what this MPN per gram is. I also don't know, but this should be some kind of a measurement. And it is believed that if this concentration is more than 0.3, then that is not good for health, right? Anything which is greater than 0.3 is supposed to be not good for health. Just remember that, right? So as I said, this is a one sample test. So what will happen? This one mu will come from the sample, right? And the other has to come from some kind of a standard. So a standard is given that it should be how much? 0.3 or less, right? So how are we going to have a null hypothesis? This would be my null hypothesis. H naught is mu equal to 0.3. And if because people are falling in, so I have every right to then conclude no, it is actually greater than 3, right? So alternative is what? Greater than. So it's very simple. I'll take this data and say this is x, right? So so x equal to what? C this thing. So I can copy this. You can see it here. Let me execute it so that so you can take this and you can simply say that this is my x. So this is my data. This is my sample. What is the size of the sample? 9. That's all. So you can see this is my x. And then what am I going to do? T-test. And T-test has many flavors, right? Later on, as I said, the T-test has a Welch is the more popular one. Otherwise, there are many flavors of T-test. Welch, this, that, right? But Welch is the most popular one. So there are many things with minor changes. That's all. So how will I run this? T-test x. This is the name of my sample. I've already declared what is x. Alternative I say should be greater than, because my alternative is mu greater than 3. And what is my mu? I have to supply some standards again which the test happens. So I say mu equal to 3. So do you see here? It's a very simple kind of a thing that I put here. I just say execute, and then let's look at the output here. Now the alternate hypothesis says that true mean is greater than 0.3. What I'm interested in this, so you can see the degrees of freedom, right? So degrees of freedom is 8, n minus 1. So the p-value is 0.02927. Now can we use the rules? If you look at this p-value is less than 0.05, isn't it? So if the p-value is less than 0.05, then what will I do? I will do what? I'll reject my H naught. Right? And what does my H naught say? H naught says that the mean is actually equal to 0.3, right? So I'll reject my H naught here. And I believe, what will I believe? That the salmonella content is greater than 0.3. I'm going to reject my H0, just remember that. And what is my H0? If you just want to revise it again, my H0 is equal to what? It is, my H0 is this, right? So I'm going to reject this. If I'm going to reject this, then what am I going to accept? I'm going to accept this, right? Just remember that. Okay. So that's what I do, right? So let's go ahead, and so a very simple technique that way, right? So let's go to a 2-sample t-test. What will I do with a 2-sample? And explanation is also written. I hope I have explained correctly. Hence this is moderately that above 0.3 mpg, and this is what we said. So we are rejecting the H0. Now let's come to the 2-sample t-test. So there are 6 subjects are given a drug treatment, and additional 6 subjects are given something known as a placebo. Placebo, you know, where at times, I mean, doctors, what they do is when they give you pills, those pills are just calcium pills, because they come to a conclusion that some illness is more of psychological than a true illness, right? So in those cases, instead of giving any medicine, what they do is they give a placebo. What is a placebo? I mean, they are blank kind of pills, right? Nothing. So that's known as a placebo thing. So there are 2 groups. One which is administered drug is known as the treatment group, and the other one which is actually given some kind of a placebo, which is a control group, right? So that's a control group. And then it is seen, let's say there is a group of people who are complaining about headache or something. Then one is given just simple some calcium things, and the other is given actually a medicine, right? So this is a 2-sample test. So you can put it like mu1 minus mu2 equal to 0. If you want to put it this way, this makes more sense. Or you can say mu1 equal to mu2. This one you say mu1 minus mu2 is less than 0, or you can say mu1 is less than mu2. This is what you are saying. So this thing I have to translate in the form of code. The data is given here. So this is the control thing, 6 samples. This is what is said. So you can take this and say that this is the control group, right? So this is a control group, and this is going to be our treat group, right? So this is our treatment group. Okay. So this is okay. So this is what is happening. And then what we do is the syntax, which is very, very simple. So what do we do? And in this case, he has said variance equal to true. I don't know why, but you may say variance equal to, you may not put anything here, right? So control, this is my first sample, treat, this is my second sample, and the alternative is less, right? That's what I've done. Now you can run it in both ways. So I say variance dot equal to true. So I'll do this, and then straight away, what do I look at? P-value. And this p-value is less than 0.05 again, right? So that means I'm going to reject my H0. What is my H0? My H0 is that both the sample means are equal, right? Both the sample means are equal. And what is the sample mean about? It's a reaction time, right? You can see reaction time. This is the reaction time. So if I reject this, then what am I going to do? If this is rejected, isn't it? This is what I'm going to reject. So what am I going to not reject? This one. So what I say is that mu1 is less than mu2. So that means the reaction time of a drug is faster than the placebo thing. Okay, that's what I'm going to conclude out of this. Now, what I can do is I can also say, let's say variance not equal. I don't know how variance not equal has been used. I mean, so I can just remove this. It's always good to be safe, right? So I do this, right? I can run it this way. So let's see if there is a difference. So I do this. Again, the same conclusion, right? Though the p-value would have changed a little bit, right? A little bit change here. You can see this is 3136. So some change which is coming here. That's all. Okay, but the same conclusion again, right? So that's the conclusion. So this is a 2-sample t-test. This is you can call it a 2 independent sample t-test. You can call it this way also, right? Now we go to a paired t-test. You may call it a paired t-test, as I said, or you may call it a pre-post test also, right? So the same thing here. A study was performed to test whether cars get better mileage on premium gas, and this is now these kind of petroleum is available in India also, right? So we want to compare cars whether they give better mileage on premium gas or regular gas, means like petrol or diesel, whatever it is. So 10 cars were first filled. Now this has to be a pair test, isn't it? Because you cannot use two set of cars to compare premium and regular, which one is better. Otherwise that would be wrong, because different cars might behave in a different way, though they may be same models, but depending on the maintenance, the driving and everything. So if you really want to test, what you have to do is you have to keep the cars same and you have to keep the drivers also same. So the 10 cars were taken, and then regular gas was filled, and then they went for they took it for a round, or they took it for a spin, and then they brought it back, and then the premium same amount of gas was filled, and same driver, same car, again they took it for a spin, and then they came back and recorded, and then we are trying to understand whether the premium is better or the regular is better. So regular, this is what the miles per gallon that were recorded. So we have it here. So this is a paired sample test that we are doing. So this is the regular thing that we can see. Okay, then we have the premium that is here. So we'll say premium is here, and we'll call it premium. This is here, and then we'll do a t-test and try to understand, is the premium like better. Always remember, the order is very, very important, right? So which one, when you're doing a t-test, it's very, very important that what you have put first. Otherwise your definition of mu1 minus mu2 will change, right? So here, this is mu1, this is mu2. That's very important, right? Alternative greater, right? So premium is greater than regular. If I put regular here and a premium here, then the sense will change. Okay, so always keep that in mind. The order is important. I cannot change premium and regular here. Paired equal to true, and I'm not saying anything about the variance here, right? So very simple, you can see this premium alternative is greater, paired equal to true. That's it. I put it here. So p-value is something which is very, very important. So I see a p-value of less than 0.05, and you know, whenever you see a p-value of less than 0.05, then what is the action to be taken? Reject H0. I mean, by chance this is the third H0 which is getting rejected. So what is the H0 if you look at it? So let's go back. So this H0 says that your premium actually gives you a better mileage. This is what you can conclude, right? So there is a strong evidence of a mean increase in gas mileage between regular and premium gasolines, isn't it? So the mileages are not equal, right? So this is a very simple document that I have, and I'll pass it on to you. So so what we have covered is the t-test, right? So similarly, if you ask me like what are the quantities which can be tested, which you can use to test, what kind of statistical quantities can you use for hypothesis testing? Generally, it would be testing around means, or it would be testing around variances, right? So f-test, I told you, is used for testing around variance, right? So hypothesis testing, there are many things. I'll discuss just one more thing before we close this. So I'll discuss this idea of ANOVA, right? So we'll discuss ANOVA for, again, we'll do it in very short, though the slides may be very long and all this thing. The full form of ANOVA is analysis of variance, right? Then, and this analysis of variance then straight away becomes your the linear regression also. So that's our first thing we'll do. Now assume that you have 10 samples and you want to understand, are these samples equal or not, right? So if you have 10 samples, then what is going to happen is you'll have to conduct 10 C2 tests, isn't it? Just imagine if I have to compare 10 samples, and t-test is a bivariate kind of a thing. That means 2 samples at a time. So I'll have to do 10 C2 testing, isn't it? 10 samples, and how many pairs can I make? 10 C2. And if you calculate 10 C2, this will come to 45. So you'll have to do how many t-tests? 45 t-tests. Now let's say if you have 100 samples, at times it can happen, right? You have 100 samples. And if you have to do 100 C2, this is a mind-boggling number, right? It is something like 100 into 99 and divided by 2. It's a big number, right? I'm not putting the exact thing, but this is something equal to 100 into 99 divided by 2. So 9,900 divided by what? 2. So 4,500 and another 450, right? So 4,950, something like this, which is a very big number. So practically doing a t-test on this becomes very, very difficult. So what is the option? We have something known as ANOVA. ANOVA stands for analysis of variance. And this way, this is a misnomer. Do you understand? The full form is analysis of variance. So when you listen to it, it sounds as if we are doing an analysis of variance. But what are we actually doing? We are doing an analysis of variance to conclude whether the means are equal or not. Right? So the alternate hypothesis is mu1 equal to mu2 equal to mu3 equal to mu k, right? This is your alternate hypothesis. Now, there is a downside to this. And what is the HL? You can read it carefully, right? At least one of the mean is different from the others, right? Read it very carefully. What does it mean is, think of 10 samples, right? So let's say 9 of my samples are around, let's say they all lie between 3 plus minus, let's say for example, plus minus 1.5. But my 10th sample suddenly is 50. My 10th sample is 50. Don't you think this is an outlier? So these 9 samples are almost in range. They are almost equal. Let me assume they are almost, statistically they are equal. I mean, equal and equal is, we'll have to do now always statistical test and conclude whether they are equal or not equal, right? Subjective things we'll never do, okay? So 15 is definitely larger. So 1 is an outlier. So what do you think will happen to, your ANOVA? Your ANOVA is going to fail, because just now, this is the downside. Just because one sample was an outlier, then what happened? The ANOVA is going to fail, isn't it? So whenever we conduct a ANOVA, and if H0 is rejected, we don't stop there. We take one more step and we call it the post hoc test. We conduct something known as a post hoc test, right? There are around 16, 17 very popular post hoc tests. The popular ones are Tukey, this, that. I generally like HOC, yeah? Post hoc test. So a post hoc test is generally done when ANOVA fails. This is just to ensure it doesn't happen just because we had one sample as an outlier and the entire ANOVA actually failed. So ANOVA, why do we use it? Multiple samples if I want to test equivalent of T only, but with multiple tests, right? So what we'll do is we'll just, like how it is done and all those things I'm not covering again, just so let's, because we know the p-value now, it is a statistical test. So any statistical test, whether it is the t-test, whether it is the f-test that I mentioned to understand variances, or it is the ANOVA test to compare multiple samples, or if your data is categorical, it's not a ratio data, then we do something known as a chi-square test, right? The chi-square test. So we may do a chi-square. Everything you can understand just by looking at the p-value. You may not understand. You may just understand what the null hypothesis is and the p-value, and you can understand what this test is done, right? So that's the beauty of it. Though you may not know how exactly this is conducted, but you know what ANOVA does, and because you know how to look at a p-value, at least to start with in life, you know what to conclude, what is the decision to be taken. You can very well take that decision, okay? So so ANOVA, like, why is this written as one way ANOVA? Because ANOVA can be two way, it can be n way. I'm not getting into two way, n way ANOVA, because again, this area where you do multi-way ANOVA is generally used in the area of experimentation, right? What is the area of experimentation? Think of a farmer, right? Now these farmers, they want to understand where do they optimize their yield, right? Yield means the crop yield, right? So they want to understand where they can get the best crop yield. So when you are talking about a crop yield, there are so many parameters that you can vary. One is the soil type, right? So let's say there is a farmer who has created 16 portions in the agricultural land that he had, and in these 16 portions he has put 16 different kind of soils, or probably 2 different kind of soils. Eight sections have one kind of a soil, the other 8 sections have the other kind of a soil. So soil is one parameter. Then the second, what he does is that he varies the fertilizers. So in one he gives a urea fertilizer, in the other he goes for a potassium fertilizer, isn't it? So fertilizers are there. That's the second variation. And then he changes the irrigation method also. So there is a drip irrigation, you know, right? So he uses a drip irrigation method, and in the other one he uses the, let's say, the normal one where water flows. So irrigation can be a different thing. The fourth dimension can be that one is like in a greenhouse, one portion is in a greenhouse, the other is outside. So I told you four variations, isn't it? So if I want to really test that, what impact, if I really want to conclude what impact these conditions have on the yield, then I'll have to use something known as multi-way ANOVA, right? That's a complicated thing, as I said, and by the explanation of it, you would have understood. And actually, this was devised for farmers, actually. So this was devised for agriculture applications for the first time, right? So by listening to it, you can very well conclude that uh, this, whenever you are conducting experiments, right, and generally when you're doing machine learning, now the experiments, the experiments and all these were old school. So earlier, like if you look at statistics till 70s, 80s, it was about conducting experiments, sampling this and that. Now with the advent of machine learning, we are into a bit modern age. So these things have now gone into a back burner. So people who know it, they know it, right? So like because I've read it for some purpose, so that's why I know it, right? Otherwise, in this era of machine learning and artificial intelligence, these things are like pretty too old now, probably, if I put it this way. So if you have interest, you can read it, but you'll not lose anything probably if you do not know two-way ANOVA or multi-way ANOVA and all those things, right? If you know one-way ANOVA, you can pick up two-way ANOVA also later on. But it just that there would be two kind of effects that you are trying to understand. Example, if you are trying to understand the effect of the soil type and the fertilizer only, you will do two-way ANOVA. But if you are just trying to read, trying to understand the effect of only one variable, that is soil type. Let's say I want to understand the impact of yield, impact of soil type on yield, then I'll do one-way ANOVA. So you understand the how many variables, how many things I want to vary, and then look at the outcome. So that is the way, that many way. So if you are just varying one thing, it is one way. If you are varying two things, it is two way, and so on and so forth. You can vary n way, right? You can have n effects, right? So these are also known as effects. Okay, so that's known as the one-way ANOVA. So we'll do it through R. So we understand the theory now. You know this is what, and even if one probably this mean, if it happens to be an outlier, then what is going to happen is your ANOVA will get uh, rejected, the H naught will get rejected. So in that case, it is always good to conduct something known as a post hoc test, right? So I'll use Martin's lecture only because he's very, very concise. That's why I like him. It doesn't unnecessarily stress things. So I'll use the Martin's material only and go there. And I'll pass it on to Ganguly so that you also have access to this. I'll pass on all the lectures of Martin. You can also download it. It's available, right? So two-way ANOVA, no, that I don't want to do. Is there some one-way ANOVA? I forgot it. Just let me like a correlation. Where is the ANOVA? Okay. Yeah, one-way ANOVA, I found it, right? So this is one-way ANOVA. So analysis of variance, we know it, right? So this is the response and factor, right? Factor is what you are varying, your variables. Response is in response to this. So your response is the yield, as I said. And factor is what? The soil type, it is only one. But if it is two, then you can have two factors, three factors, right? So let's take an example and discuss this. So there is a drug company, right? It wants to test three formulations of pain relief, migraine for migraine, right? So there are 27 people who volunteered. Human testing happens for drugs. So the subjects were instructed to take drug during the migraine headache whenever they feel that migraine headache, right? And then after that, after giving some time, because you need to give the medicine some time to react. So after a specified time, after 5 minutes, they were asked to report the pain level on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 means the pain being as it is. I mean, there is no change. And 1 means that there is a very, very effective reduction in the pain level, right? The pain is almost like nil. That's what it means. So drug A, these are 9 guys who took it, and this is what they reported: 4, 5, 4, 3, 2. So the lesser the better in this case. Just remember this, right? And drug B, it is, you will see a bit higher numbers. I mean, when I'm looking at it, this is what I'm feeling, a subjective feeling I'm telling you. So drug C, this is what. Now, can we actually test it, right? So you see how the data preparation is the important thing. So look at it, the way like the data is prepared. Okay, so this is very specific, the way like the data should be prepared in R for one way. This you have to keep in mind, right? So the pain data, all the 27 observations are in one line. I'm naming it as pain. Okay, then I'm creating another object by the name of drug, right? This is a very interesting object that I'm creating, right? I already know that the first 9 are for drug A, the second 9 are for drug B, and then the last 9 observations are for drug C. I already know that, right? So that's what I'm trying to tell R also. So if I write drug here, what do I see? I'll see something like this, right? So there is A, how many times? 9 times. B, how many times? It is again 9 times. C this time, right? So this is what I have. Then what I'll do is I will make a data frame out of it, right? So migraine is the data frame that I'm making out of it. So look at the syntax. So what I'm doing is migraine equal to data dot frame. And what do I want in that data dot frame? Pain, this one, this object, and this object, right? Make a data frame, combine this. So let's look at migraine. What are we getting? Migraine, right? This is here, migraine. And if I type it, you can see it. So we have 27 observations. And what do we see at the top? So pain becomes the variable name, drug becomes a. So this is when you want to prepare data, some artificial data, as we call it, or synthetic data, generally artificial, or we call it synthetic data. So whenever you want to prepare data from your side, or you may say manual data or artificial data, synthetic data, whatever you call it. So you prepare it, then you can prepare it this way. So there is a drug name, and this is, but this is the format in which you require the data. This is very, very important, right? So remember that. Now, once that is ready, so what do we need to do? We can do a box plot, right? So let's do a box plot here. We discussed what a box plot is, right? So a box plot gives me 5 quantities, right? That I discussed last time. So let's look at the box plot. If I squeeze it too much, then the plot may fail to. Now see see there is a message it is giving. What is the message is giving? Error in plot.new, and nothing is reported here. This space is empty. The plot thing is empty. The figure margins are too large. So when you get this message, just drag this thing a little bit towards the left, right? Make it a little bigger and rerun the command, right? So I'll just press the up arrow key, press it again, and this is what I get. So I'll zoom it. Now, if you look at these drugs, this is the drug number A. Ideally, this should have been here, right? This thick line should have been here, right? This thick line that you are seeing here, because this is your minimum. Your box plot shows what? 5 quantities, right? Remember that? This is your Q1 here. If you don't remember it, just for your remembrance, this is Q2, this is your median, this is your Q3, right? And this is your max quantity. So if everything is okay, if the data is normally distributed, but this is a very small data. If you have 9 points, you cannot expect them to be normally distributed, right? Not going to happen. So this should be this symmetric. We say these are known as the whiskers, isn't it? These whiskers should be how long? The length of this whisker should be 1.5 times IQR. What is IQR? Q3 minus Q1 is known as IQR, right? So 1.5 times your IQR, and IQR is Q3 minus Q1, right? So this data looks, so if you look at the median, it's almost lying here. This is the median value. For this, the second drug, the median value is how much? 6 point something. And for the C drug also, this is 6 point something. So the median of these two are almost equal. And when you see a dot like this, do you see a dot like this? This is an outlier, right? This is an outlier. Somebody has reported extreme pain, right? The drug B hasn't worked. So this is only one guy probably who says that the drug is only, it's almost like little bit reduction only, isn't it? So this is known as outlier. When you start getting a dot here, this is an outlier. So we can see here, there is a difference, isn't it? The efficacy, the drug A seems to be better because you can see a difference here, right? So the drug A is an outlier. So even before I run it, what I'm anticipating is this ANOVA is going to fail. B and C are equal, there is no problem, but this A guy definitely will make the ANOVA fail. This is my anticipation, as I said. Now I'll really go and test it and see, because see, this is so less, and they are almost at a similar level, probably you can call it 6, okay, but this drug is at 4. 4 is better, isn't it? Reducing a lot of pain, so seems to be a better drug. So let's see the same happen. Box plot definitely gives me idea that is there, but as I said, this is a subjective idea, so I need to do a ANOVA because that's a formal method of testing. I need to do formal testing. I can't do this subjective stuff, right? The way like I did it. So the commands is very simple. As I said, this is response and factor and then data name. So we'll come here and we'll store it into something known as results. So we take results here as the object. So I'll take results as the object and I say AOV, that's all, analysis of variance. Pain, drug, pain is my outcome, right, that I'm measuring, and drug is my factor. So always remember, this is the factor always here, and this is whatever my response is. Response or outcome, you may call it. Data equal to migraine, I put it here. Now if I write results here, want to see what is inside this object, then it just tells me that this is the call. Call means the formula that you have used, sum of squares and all this, okay, but it doesn't give me a p-value, which is my strength, which is where I can conclude. So at times, remember, if you want the full result, just type summary and then type this, right, summary results. So use this, and then if you see, you will get a better output, right? So here straight away, the other things I may understand or I may not understand. This is PR. Now this is not writing a p-value this time. You're writing PR. PR stands for probability value, right? So p value, the full form is probability value. So what do I see in this? P value is again very small. So the p value is very small. That means what? The H naught has to be rejected. So if H naught is rejected, then what is the alternate? The alternate is at least one of the mean is not equal, right? So ANOVA is rejected, I know that. So I need to understand why has this happened, right? Probably which is the kind of which is the drug which has led to this. So let me continue with that. So I'll do a post hoc. So post hoc is done two ways. Either I can use this code, you can just focus on this. So now I'm doing a post hoc. I'm trying to know why is this failed. So one is pairwise dot t-test. So this means that for all the pairs that you can make here, do pairwise t-test and report the p-adjusted or the Bonferroni. Bonferroni is one of the post hoc tests, right? So do a Bonferroni for me, Bonferroni, right? So it will do a Bonferroni and it will make a matrix out here. This is the p-value matrix. So it says that the chances that A and B, so what is the hypothesis that is being tested here? Just focus on it for a minute. So what does this represent? This represents the test of this hypothesis. What is this hypothesis? H naught. This is the p-value of the result of this hypothesis being tested. Mu A equal to mu B. This is what is being tested here. Mu A equal to mu B. Right? This is this one. This is this one. Right? Here this is tested. What is being tested here? This one. This is the H naught. So there are three H naughts, isn't it? Because you have three pairs. So 3C2 is equal to 3. So that means there would be three testings that are done, isn't it? Very simple. Mu A equal to mu C. Mu A equal to mu C. Right? This is equal to mu A equal to mu C. Isn't it? Because there's a pairwise t-test. And this one stands for what? Mu B equal to mu C. That's the third combination possible. So this H naught stands for mu B equal to mu C. Okay. So this will stand for mu B equal to mu C. Okay, so this is what happened. Now let's look at the thing. So if my p-value is 0.001, so that means this H naught is going to get rejected. So mu A is not equal to mu B. Now if I look at this, this is again less than 0.05. I'm again mentioning this word, less than 0.05. So this is going to get rejected. And this is 1, exactly 1. So this is more than 0.05. So I'll say yes, mu A is equal to mu B. So which is the outlier? A is the outlier. Neither is mu B and mu C are equal. So why is this failing? Because mu A is an outlier. So that's why I do a post hoc. What reason that this test has failed? So mu A is is the reason. So mu A is more effective than the others. B and C are equally effective. This is what I can conclude very safely. Okay, so this is one. Now let me go ahead and I can do a Tukey also, right? So this, I have this result, so I can do a Tukey HSD also on this, right? So Tukey HSD is done in a different way. You can see it, right? I'm not using the command pair.test. So you can look at the two ways that I've done, right? So pair.test is done here, and it is straight away Tukey HSD, and I'm using that particular thing results that is there, and I say do it at a confidence level of 0.9, right? So let's see what the outcome is. So you can see here it gives all the combination B and A, the difference is 2.11, and these are my, do you remember what is this lower and upper? So these are the interval estimates of the mean, right? So if you take a mean of 3.39 and 0.82, you will get it 2.11 only. So this is my point estimate, and this is the interval estimate that I told you, right? So this is your point estimate of the difference, and this is, it says that the actual thing will vary something like between this. So this is 0.11, and the actual thing should vary between this. This is what it says, okay? And the p-value, p adjusted. So mu A equal to mu B, this is the null hypothesis which is tested. It gets rejected here again. So the Tukey also says A and B are not equal. Tukey also says C and A are not equal. And Tukey says A and B are equal. So Bonferroni and Tukey, they both give the same result. In some cases, when you have large C, this is a very, let's say, synthetic example, right? But wherever there is a close tie, your Tukey and Bonferroni can give you different results, right? That can happen. I always trust the Tukey more. Tukey HSD, I trust more than the Bonferroni thing, right? That is because that is more robust and all this thing. Now you may say, what is robustness and how do I define robustness? So there is a lot of literature available. You can read about it. What does robustness mean and all those things. Or slowly you can read it over a period of time. I'm not saying that go and jump right now, right? So, and how Tukey test is conducted, Bonferroni test is conducted. That's also an area, right? So we are not discussing it here, but generally whenever, like, as I said that in universities, whenever, like if somebody calls me to take a statistics course only, which is around 40 hours kind of a course, then we go into all these details. What is a Bonferroni? How is it done? What is a Tukey? How do we do it? Why am I saying that Tukey is a robust thing, Bonferroni is not, and all those things to be discussed there. But that is about a statistics class, right? Here we are learning whatever we are because we want to use it further for machine learning and AI. That should be our focus right now, the machine learning and AI part of it, right? This is just some basic thing that we'll require, right? If we forget the theory and all those things, that's all right. The only thing is you should remember it like a use case, right? When to use a 2 sample test, when to use a single sample test, all those things, right? So there is a chi-square. If you want to do it, we can do a chi-square also, but let me see if I have something. But if we are not able to do, then don't worry about it. Okay, sorry. Variable selection is a different thing. I know that, like in your folder, I've already kept it. Also, like this, I'll pass on to you. So this is a nice document that I put here, right? So please do go through it. This is about using R. This is 38 page document. So here, this is about introduction to categorical data, right? Categorical data, as I told you, is a difficult thing. So how do you analyze using R? So this is completely using through R. Okay. So that's what we have. Okay, so this is here. Chi-square is here in this, right? So there is a chi-square. So the data sets, they've used the inbuilt R data sets. Lot of data sets I told you. So here there is about proportions. You can do a proportion testing, right? The way you are doing testing of means, testing of variance, you can do a testing of proportions. All that stuff can be done. Proportions and all those things, I'll advise don't get into it in the first way. But this is about like creating contingency tables. Chapter number 2 is important. If you can spend some time on this, just copy the code. That what I'm not advising anything. Don't go through any theory. Just go through this document, right? So it will make some kind of a table. Try to look at what table is being created. That's all, right? How does it create table? If I want to create a two-way table, then how do I create it, right? So that's all. So don't worry like what's an odds ratio is right now. The chi-square is here, right? So what is the chi-square test of independence and all these things, right? So probably we'll discuss chi-square sometime later. Right now we are not going to discuss chi-square. So whenever the chance comes and we need to understand what a chi-square is, we'll discuss that chi-square, right?